Now that students are back in school and we've settled into a new routine, Season 2 of our podcast will focus on academics, growth, and planning, and the inner workings of the district. Join us as we publish new episodes to break down all the ways we provide a quality educational experience for our students and staff. I'm Andrew Kim, Superintendent of Schools for the Comal Independent School District and host of Comal ISD Radio. Joining me today is Janet Schimank and Holly Stripling, who are working with us as coordinators at our support services with all of our teachers in the work of science of reading. So thanks for joining me today. I appreciate it very much. What is a science of reading? So let's kind of start from there. So how about a quick 30-second commercial? What would you say to a stranger what a science of reading is about?
Well, the settled science of reading, we call it the settled science because there is a preponderance of evidence out there that explicitly tells us how our brains learn to read and the instruction that best works to help our students become a skilled reader. And so there's not any guesswork there. It's not a political debate. It's just science of what happens and what we need to do as teachers to enable that process to go through. The settled science tells us how we learn to read and what goes wrong when it doesn't. And like I said, the kind of instruction that works the best. So our goal in our Reading Academy is to help communicate what exactly that is.
Yeah. So you mean to tell me that we don't just watch Sesame Street or I just read, a couple of children's books. And I thought that's how I just learned to read. So there's actually formal steps to reading. Is that what we're saying there, Holly?
Yes. All of our brains learn to read in the same way. Some of us may get there faster than others, but we are going to benefit from understanding how that wiring works in our brain. And that's one of the things in our first session with our teachers we talked about. We're almost like making them neurosurgeons because they're going to rewire the brain because we are not natural born readers. We are born to speak, and we learn to speak by being immersed in the language and hearing it and imitating it. But that's not how we actually learn to read. We have to hear the speech, and we need to then convert that to what we're seeing in the print. And there's wiring that's going on in our brains and connections that need to be made. And part of that settled science, we showed the teachers a kind of a ladder of reading where about 5% are going to naturally kind of come to it with the exposure. They're going to get there quickly. And there's another 30%, 25% there they're going to need the structure that we're showing these teachers, the structure of literacy. But that 60% there needs to have this explicit, systematic approach. So that's really, we're showing them all the areas of the science of reading. And one of the things that's a great visual is Dr. Scarborough's reading rope. And that's something that really grounds everything that we're teaching to the teachers so that they can use all those pieces of the rope and twine them together as they're teaching to where they can get to that point of all of them together as a skilled reader.
So the rope is sort of metaphorical in terms of how this process will go.
Yeah, it's a wonderful model of how reading develops. It shows all the different components that are involved and how they're slowly intertwined over time to create that skilled reader.
Yeah.
So it explicitly lines out all the components and how those components develop over time.
So in some sense, we are creating sort of formulaic way, proven by research and science over many, many years, to teach our teachers how to really apply that in a classroom situation.
Yes.
Does that mean the calendar wall goes away and the fun stuff goes away? How's that look in a classroom now?
No, fun doesn't go away. We're having lots of fun. It does not go away. It's putting everybody in a focused understanding that, for instance, one of the changes a lot of the teachers came away with, both Janet and I in our education were told to do word walls. And that's a common thing that you see in classrooms. But one of the problems with an ABC word wall is you're focusing just on the first letter. And we want to focus on what the vowel sound is. So we've talked to the teachers a little bit, and we're going to give them more information about having a sound wall, having a vowel valley, understanding how our written language works by understanding that speech first. And that's that speech to the print and making those connections. And that needs to be done in an explicit and systematic way. We can't just put a bunch of books in front of kids and put a bunch of words around the room and expect them to just learn to read.
Yeah. So in some sense, there's I think maybe a prevailing theory that's being out there that if it's a print-rich environment, you have bookcases with a lot of books, the word wall. Every bit of the wall covered up, the fire marshal's love and all that stuff.
Exactly.
Is somehow we're going to be immersed.
That's right.
And if we're immersed, we're going to somehow start learning and reading. So are you saying that that's not necessarily the case?
Yes. Well, that's how we learn to speak. That's exactly what we do. We're just immersed with it and we learn to speak. We learn to speak the language.
Because we mimic and we perhaps copy.
Right.
But we're also wired to speak. We're not wired to read. And reading has not been something that has been a part of, humanity, but for the last, several hundred years.
Oh my gosh, Holly, we're going on a history lesson right now.
We are going to
have history.
Gosh. Our teachers do get a history lesson because some of it too, when we start looking at why a word says something the way it does or why letters work the way they do, you have to look at the history of our language and you have to look at what the influences have been. And so that's understanding, truly understanding. And both Janet and I would tell you when we went through college, I didn't learn anything about phonics and how my language works. To understand that, it was coming into education and getting I was taught Spalding phonics. And then both Janet and I have been through programs to work with dyslexia students and being taught that their brain works differently, but it's really all of our brains.
Syure. And really for a second language learner, that's a whole different set of circumstances to undo sort of your rhythmic way of pronunciation, syllabic, how it's put together.
That's right.
On your first language to your second language learning.
Yes.
Right?
And those sounds is really what locks in our ability to read. So Holly was talking about how we actually change the brain is because we take parts of the brain that were used for other functions. Like, for example, there's a section or part of our brain that is designed for recognizing faces. Well, we actually repurpose that part of the brain to recognize letters.
Yeah.
That's why when kids are first learning to read, the letters that if you flip them upside down, they're a different letter. Whereas if you flip the face upside down, it's the same face. And so beginning to distinguish different letters like that through exposure, we actually will redesign that brain to utilize that same section that we used to use for reading faces. Now we're changing it to read letters and then connecting those letters, the shape of those letters to the sounds of whatever language that you're speaking. That's making that initial connection between what we call the graphemes to the phonemes. And that really is what begins to unlock the code of reading.
And then it's any language really too. One of the scientists that we shared with the teachers in our first session, he's a French scientist, and even for speaking French and learning how to read French, that letter box in the back has to then start connecting to the sounds that you're hearing and wiring the brain forward because it can't do it all by itself. It's not that one part of the brain. It's really the whole brain, but also looking at what things are we doing in the classroom that are very right brain, that may be very creative and they're wonderful in and of themselves, but are they connecting that left side? Are they making that connection from the back with the letter boxes into the full areas that need to be utilized?
Yeah. It seems to me, though, as just a casual observer of kids and students, they seem to mimic quite a bit as a result of that, sort of the rhythmic songs or raps, that are out there, at an early age.
Mm-hmm.
In fact, even my own kids, it's almost like they memorize the rhythmic repeatedness of the chorus in rap songs or songs for that matter.
They're developing an oral language, and that's the basis of where, the vocabulary and your comprehension, because all of that, goes into play also with your letters and sounds.
So this work is translated to a formalized academy, specifically creatively called the Comal Reading Academy. So we just now starting that process.
Mm-hmm.
So tell me about that. Who's involved in the Comal Reading Academy?
So TEA is the one that has authorized that all
Texas... This is education agency.
Yes.
Mm-hmm.
That all K through 3 teachers and anybody who basically has their hands on them. So GT teachers, dyslexia teachers, instructional coaches, assistant principals, and principals have to go through this reading academy in the next 3 years. New teachers coming out will have to take the science of reading exam in place of going through the academy. So those that we're working with, once they go through this system over the course of the year, that will go on their certification. They will be cleared, so to speak.
Okay.
So over the next 3 years, we have a lot of teachers and coaches and principals.
So we currently have our first sort of cohort of teachers, and they're in grades
K through 2. We have a majority of first grade teachers going through this year. We do have a few kindergarten and also a couple of second grade. Along with their special ed teachers, yes, and their instructional coach at the campus, along with their administrator.
And we have a few ERIs as well, or early reading interventionists, and then the principals.
So we have a sort of a timeline stair step of getting all of our teachers into this and understanding that and really studying it. In fact, in some sense, it's almost like a graduate course for many of our teachers who may not have had that in their traditional experience of going through the College of Ed to get their certification in the first place.
Right. many times it's eye-opening already in the few sessions that we've had that teachers are like, why didn't I ever hear this before? And so even though it's information that's been out there for a long time, it hasn't been a part of the curriculum in the teacher preparation programs. Yeah. And so I'm glad that that's part of the whole initiative as well. But it's very well received. The teachers are eager to learn this and to put it into practice immediately.
Is there an opportunity for a teacher who's teaching 5th grade, 6th grade, 8th grade, 9th grade? Because oftentimes we have students coming in to us, to our school district, from other school districts that may have missed. Not every kid comes to us as a kindergartner, for example. So they come in for all over. Is there a plan to eventually talk about this in the middle schools and maybe high schools even?
I think that's a great question. And I would love to see some planning in the works for that.
Yeah, I do. I mean, even though we're talking about the science reading, I will tell you that my thought is always that in secondary schools, in middle schools and high schools, the conventional way of teaching reading is just reading by novels, and so we read novels and it's really about vocabulary, content, context, and so forth and so on, which is fine. But some students are struggling because they're not at the level of reading capable of keeping up with some other students who are maybe naturally inclined or are way ahead of that situation.
They're missing those foundational skills.
Yeah.
And TEA, from what I've seen on the website, we have the next 3 years to do our K-3 teachers. And then there's a plan that will go into place for 4th and 5th grade teachers. But we as professional development, we're going out to other campuses just to kind of help with those, fill in those holes.
Yeah, I think piloting some level with the middle school group of teachers.
Yes, because it's never too late for those teachers to learn and
absolutely.
to
I think when we talk about adult readers who are struggling, if you look at those programs out there, they really do concentrate on these things that we're talking about. And so I think that's very important. And I do want to plug vocabulary.com because I think that's a very important tool.
It is. Vocabulary is huge.
Yes.
In developing that oral language, because if you don't have those words already in your head, once you do have the phonics knowledge to sound them out, then you're not going to even know what that's a word or not. So you must have that oral language there with the vocabulary.
There was always a portion of Sesame Street where the two sort of silhouettes of the people would come in and do the whatever, or happy, happy. And that was my favorite part of watching Sesame Street, by the way. So anyway.
They were giving you that phonology and that orthographic mapping.
So as a parent, what can I do at home to help this out for my youngest kids?
Read to your children as much as possible, because what you're doing is you're not only exposing them to this rich vocabulary that's usually in books more so than in our conversations, but also to text structure, because the sentence structure that are in text are different than what we speak. So reading to your child is helping them gain a wealth of information about that kind of language that will help prepare them then when they're reading their own.
Maybe this is a little controversial question, but I want to just ask and we'll finish this out. So a lot of our kids today, I see and I hear about downloading books for audiobooks. To me, those things have a level of convenience factor as an adult. But for a young child learning to read, is it the best thing to do with the audiobooks? Because if it's a sight to speech to read, where does audiobooks come into play? Because, every kid just about nowadays are having access to these devices, right?
Well, it comes into play with it's a speech to print. So the importance of a read aloud, and we've talked about this in both of our sessions, is very vital. You are still making the same connections in your brain if you're hearing that story read aloud to you as if you were reading it.
Yeah.
So it has the development, though. It depends on where that child is in their own reading development. Because if they're at the point where they have already started to develop their own word reading skills, then yes, you want to provide them with lots of opportunities to put that into practice and read on their own. But at the same time, you can expose them to books that they are not able to read on their own yet. And those are the ones that you either want to listen to or have someone read to you.
Yeah, I think the whole goal, I would think, is to increase your frequency of reading in terms of speed so that it increases level of comprehension.
Yes, that's your sight word recognition and that fluency.
Right.
But it's also making sure one of the ahas I think a lot of teachers had in our first session is that what text are you putting in front of them? It's got to be a connected text. Right. If I'm learning a specific sound, symbol relationship, I need to then practice that.
Yeah, the way I kind of interpret it sometimes is that if I struggle through 3 pages because I'm trying to decode every word in it, then I'm not even thinking about comprehending. In fact, I read 2 pages of it and I had no idea what I just read because all I was trying to figure out is what to say going forward with that. So I struggle. If we're wanting kids to comprehend the message, if we want kids to understand, and once you understand comprehension, you can inference, you can generalize, you can create main ideas, right? You can create characterizations. But it's hard to get to that outcome if you're struggling through the pages to get to that.
And I'll say that the rope, Scarborough's reading rope that we mentioned earlier about the model of reading development, really helps understand that piece a lot better, because there are lots of different skills going on. And it's just a matter of over time how that develops and what is the focus at each different time. So you're speaking of students that are really laboriously decoding a book and they're not able to focus on the comprehension. That is represented by what's going on the road, because that oral language still needs to be there.
Right.
And your reading comprehension still can be supported through read-alouds or audiobooks. But when they are reading text themselves, their focus at that level is basically practicing that letter sound recognition.
Yeah, good. All right. Well, I'll tell you what, I really appreciate y'all's work. I'm excited to see our teachers getting together for a change to learn about this and really putting into application in our classrooms. Certainly, I think there's going to be more needs for readers and books. I would love to see more poetry being utilized as a result of this, and certainly songs. And I think there's some natural things out there with that. And so this is a fantastic opportunity for us and fantastic opportunity for our kids. So we're looking forward to continuous work in this. So once again, you've been listening to the Comal ISD Radio. Join us next time as we talk about perhaps the science of writing, because that's not hardwired from the beginning. So thank you for joining. Thanks so much.